Okay, I'm unmuted.
How are you doing?
Um, I guess I'm okay. I still feel a little weird about doing this, about giving advice in general.
What's wrong about that?
I don't know. I'm
Nope.
weird. I don't have any formal training or anything. I just know what I know from reading a lot.
The offspring says hello. No. She tried to pop in here and say hi. So, I mean, well, that's the thing though, is that when you learn about writing and when you learn about stories, a lot of time you learn by reading books. That's just kind of the go-to, right?
Yeah.
So what kind of books did you read primarily that caused you to appreciate the genre where everybody gets killed? What led to this?
Well, I read a lot of Stephen King when I was a teenager. And I read a lot of fantasy. I read Lord of the Rings when I was a kid.
Yeah.
That's probably primarily where it came from. And, it's not just books, too. It's any kind of media, movies, comics, TV shows.
So do you think that, there's a certain kind of writer who writes murder and death in their books? Or do you think there's like no way to tell if somebody's going to be killing somebody in their stories?
I think it's more that there's a certain kind of writer that doesn't kill characters. Typically, straight up romance authors don't do it, and that's good because their readers would kill them.
Well, they don't kill active characters, but they still usually have like some kind of death in the family. And then everybody who's sad and emotional. And I mean, you can get that a lot of times.
Yeah, you can. No, I think it's just a question of the kind of story that you're writing, the tone that you're going for, the themes that you're trying to work with. Most of the time, death isn't really out of place in fiction because it's such a huge part of life. Everybody deals with it at some point or another.
That is true. Yeah. So because, most of us do kind of encounter death at some point in life, do you put, personal experience about stuff into your stories, or are you, just kind of trying to make the characters relatable by dealing with death?
For me personally, I've never put any personal experience of that type into my stories. But a writer certainly can. I mean, there have been plenty of stories about characters dealing with sickness or, I don't know, parent dying.
Yeah, absolutely. So now when you are, writing up a story, so when you have a story, are you more of a pantser or more of a plotter, or do you just kind of plants it where you have like a general idea and then just kind of wing it along the way?
I'm more of a plotter, so usually I know going into it which characters aren't going to make it to the end, which I guess helps me keep from being too attached.
Okay, I can see that. So how do you decide which characters are going to not make it?
Usually, well, first of all, every character in the story needs to serve a purpose by being there. Mm-hmm. If it's just some random character that you spend a lot of time with, but they don't really impact the story in any way, and then you kill them off, I feel like that's kind of wasting the reader's time. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. And if it's a character that does impact the story, then usually the death either can motivate another character in some way, or they've served their purpose and it's better to kind of get them out of the way.
Okay.
So if they were still there, they might interfere with the story that you have planned, and it's better to just remove them from the stage, so to speak.
So do you usually, create characters knowing that they're going to be killed in the story? Or is it just kind of, oh yeah, they need to die at some point? Or is it, hey, this character is here specifically to serve this purpose, they shall die?
A lot of characters do get created with that purpose in mind. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just depends on the kind of story that you're telling. And then sometimes if it's a side character, especially if you have a large cast, and you find that you've come to a point where there's an opportunity to kill them off and they've done what you need them to do, and it doesn't, as long as it doesn't hurt the story in any way or the tone of the story, then you could do it if you want. It's totally fine.
Now, when you create these characters, specifically to kill them, is there certain aspects of them? Like, do you find yourself kind of, taking out characters who are similar in certain ways, or are they all just kind of different along the way?
Well, I suppose it depends on what kind of characters you're talking about. Like if you're talking about, I don't know, say some villains' faceless minions, then they're not really characters per se. They're just kind of, you might have hero characters killing them off left and right. If it's, I don't know, individual characters that you spent time crafting, well, when you say like creating,
mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry, can you like expand on the question a little bit?
So when you are, making these characters and you know that they're going to die, right? Are they the similar like archetype, or is it, that they always serve a purpose to another character? Do they stand individually and you just off them? Because you're right. Like if they're minions for a major character, then they can kind of drop like flies and they're replaceable and it's, no big deal. But if it's somebody where they're always a mentor to something, right? Like, do they have to serve that bigger purpose or be minions? Or are there a lot of levels in between that you find in your writing?
There are definitely archetypes that the reader would typically expect that character to get killed off at some point.
Such as?
You mentioned the mentor. That's the obvious one.
Yeah.
You think of Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars. He did what he did, served his purpose, and died. Dumbledore kind of serves the same purpose in Harry Potter, even though it took however many books to get there.
Were you in a rush? It took so many books to get there.
I let Harry grow up a little bit, so he's ready for it. But but you can also kind of turn that trope on its head a little bit too. I mean, Tolkien did that with Gandalf, where in The Hobbit, he got rid of him by just having him say, "All right, I'm going to head out. You guys go deal with the dragon." And then in The Lord of the Rings, he does kill him, but then he brings it back. So you can.
Have you ever done that with a character? Have you ever brought a character back?
I don't think so. I mean, in a fantasy setting, obviously you can do it if the world allows for it. And you can also certainly do it if the death isn't, confirmed. Like if there's no body, there's not necessarily a death.
Yeah. So now, okay. So those who have not read some of your work, just to kind of intro to Phil's stuff here. Phil is kind of known as a serial killer for his characters, especially also even for, because Sallow House has a lot of deaths in it and don't get attached to anyone, right? Because as soon as you get attached to the characters, they fall off. And then you've got, your other book series where you had, of course, the character that killed all of us internally when we learned of his death. So, and again, you handled killing your characters very differently based on the book that you were writing, right? So like in Sallow House, you have, literally as soon as you kind of start to get introduced to a character, you're like, oh, I kind of like this one. Okay. Oh my God, there they go. They die. Whereas the main character that all of us, fell in love with the other series, it was that slow buildup over so much time. And then suddenly you just ran past the death as if it was nothing. And I remember I specifically stopped you and I was like, did you just say what I thought you said? And you're like, yeah, by the way. No, no. So you handle, killing off your characters in very different methods. What is it that causes you to treat them so differently? And because especially, Sallow House is much shorter than the other book that you were working on. So how come this size book has like murder all over the place and like an epic fantasy? Just, even though there's wars and everything, there's just the one that just beats you in the face and stabs you in the heart. And you just sit there and go, no. So how do you kind of decide what type of effect it's going to have on your reader?
Well, in the case of Sallow House, I don't know, that might be a slight exaggeration. There's a few deaths.
Have you counted them?
No. But it's a horror novel, so, and it's about a serial killer who gets turned into a vampire. So it's, what else am I going to do?
It was just kind of a shoe-in for the job then.
Yeah. In the case of the epic fantasy,
I'm trying not to say his name. I'm trying not to say his name so that when people go to read your book, they know the character who's going to not make it. See what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't want anybody else to see it coming the way you didn't see it coming.
I want them to feel the same pain that all of us went through and the shock.
That was kind of a case where I spent a chapter or a section of the book, really, since I'll probably break it up into chapters later in editing, but a section of the book kind of putting my main character into one situation, and this other character was there too with him every step of the way, as he's dealing with the situation that he's in. Once that was done, there was kind of a time skip 3 years into the future, and I didn't need the character anymore. And furthermore, it was just kind of an aspect of the world in which they lived. They're a tribal society in a medieval setting. So
you don't think there's any way your character could have made it?
I don't know what he would have done after that point in the book.
So, okay, so here's a question. When you are charting out these stories and plotting them beforehand, do you just kind of plot that character until they no longer serve a purpose? And then you're like, all right, you're done. Is that the criteria? How do you decide who to kill?
That's a part of it, certainly. In this case, it was also a question of motivating the main character to, because in that situation, there was a bunch of other characters that were kidnapped,
Mm-hmm.
women and children basically kidnapped and taken away. And so the main character has to go on a rescue mission. I wanted this particular character to show that they put up a fight, you know, that they didn't just, it wasn't just a case of, you know, my characters being completely ineffectual. It was some characters were not present at the time, but the characters who were there tried to stop this awful thing from happening and failed.
Yeah.
And as for the characters that, how I decide which ones die, yeah, I mean, it's usually the case of what serves the story at that particular time. It can also be a case of what serves the themes that you're working with. Like if you're writing a story about death, then you might have, I mean, you might even kill off the main character.
Have you ever done that?
I don't think so.
Yet.
Well, I've done it in short stories, but not, I don't think I've done it in a novel.
So now you mentioned, you know, kind of how that death serves another character. So is there ever a pattern that you find as far as, you know, what section of the book you usually kill off a character? Is it usually act 1, act 2, act 3? Is it after a major event? Is it just primarily when they've served their purpose? How do you kind of gauge storyline wise where to kill someone?
It's usually, you would usually do it during the rising action, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, there are probably others that are more qualified to talk about the structure of a story, but it seems like as you raise the stakes, that's a good time to kill off a character.
It's not bad. That's not bad. Now, is it possible to kill too many characters?
I'm sure it is, but it probably depends on the kind of story you're telling.
I knew you weren't going to have
it also, yeah, it also depends on what the reader is willing to put up with. I think probably the end of Harry Potter is a good example of this because she kills off a butt ton of characters right at the end. I mean, I don't remember all their names, but you got like the one of those Weasley twins who is always joking throughout the entire course of the story. And then at the end, in this big battle, he gets killed off. I think it's fine. I mean, I'm sure plenty of readers were upset, but I think it's fine because of the situation that the characters are in and the what's at stake. Whether or not she killed off too many characters, that's probably just a matter of individual opinion.
We'll see. We'll see. So do you think that you have an average kill count for stories, or is it dependent upon something? Like, how do you know if you've got enough deaths in a story or not enough deaths in a story? How do you handle that?
I wouldn't try to go by statistics. I think it's just a matter of what serves the story. If you need to kill off 10 different characters and you only have 12, I mean, if you need to do it, you do it. But if you're writing a horror story and every single character survives and that's what's necessary, then that's fine. You can do that too.
Have you ever written a story that has a happy ending? I love that you have to think about this.
I don't think I have necessarily. Maybe, okay. When I was in first grade.
Oh my goodness.
We got this writing prompt where you wake up and you have like an elephant's ears, or no, a trunk, an elephant's trunk and butterfly wings and I don't know, something else. And I wrote a story where I went to go find the wizard that cursed me, and I set his house on fire, and then it made me go back to normal. But it was a happy ending for the main character.
Oh my goodness. Did your teacher have a talk with your parents?
Yeah, she was effusive in her praise, actually.
Awesome. Oh my goodness, that's hilarious. That's pretty cool though. Have you ever written something that doesn't kill a character?
Yes.
And it still didn't have a happy ending?
Not really. More bittersweet.
Do you think that it's possible to have death in stories and have a happy ending?
Yeah, I mean, you can kill a bad guy off and, you know, it's a happy ending for your characters.
You only kill bad guys, though.
It depends on the story. Personally, I don't usually only kill bad guys.
No.
But that's just because of the kind of stories that I write.
Yeah. So when you do, you know, and just like you were saying, like you don't always study, you know, a science behind the whole killing character. Sometimes it just fits the story, and by golly, that's where it goes. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you get a lot of that information just by reading other stories, right? So when you have read books, what do you think was the book that had the best death example? Like, what is your kind of go-to if somebody says, I want the best death in a book, and you go, try this one?
I guess a really great example is the death of Ned Stark in Game of Thrones, because you're with him throughout that entire book. He's, you know, one of the main viewpoint characters, and at the end, he's been put in this situation where there's he thinks that, you know, there's going to be a way out for him, but because of the character of, when I say character, I mean the personality of Joffrey, who's, you know, kind of a little he says off with his head, and it fits the story perfectly.
Have you ever gotten emotional from a character's death?
Yes, once.
Who was it?
In the comic book series Sandman, there is a storyline where the main character, Morpheus, is looking for his brother who has basically disappeared. And the way that he eventually finds him is that he goes to, his son is the mythological character Orpheus.
Okay.
Who, just going through the myth really quick, tried to go into the underworld to rescue his lover Eurydice, and was told to, you know, leave without looking back, and if he looks back, then he'll lose her. And he goes, and he as he's almost out, he's been listening the whole time, and he doesn't hear anything behind him, and he thinks he's been tricked. So he looks back at the last minute, and she's there, but then she has to go back into the underworld. So then he comes out, and there's these, I don't know, river nymphs or something that tear him apart. And so all that's left of him is his head, but he's still alive. And so in the story, whatever 2,000 plus years later, he's still alive on this island in Greece. He's an oracle, I guess you could say.
Okay.
And, Morpheus goes to him, and the only way that he can get what he's looking for is to grant his son a favor, and his son wants to die. Oh. So after the very end of the story, after he's found his brother and everything, he goes back to his son and he kills him basically, and it's kind of heartbreaking.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right, I totally get that one. Yeah, that was done really well.
And it's much better than I'm describing, obviously.
All right, so if we want to cry, then that's definitely a storyline to follow. Now, who do you think had a death in a story and you were like, this is absolutely the most absurd thing I've ever read? This was terrible. Who does not do death well?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot now. Okay. Did you ever see the Zack Snyder Batman versus Superman movie?
Sadly,
yeah. Yeah. Superman's death in that was, I thought, pretty stupid.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of stupid leading up to it, but the fact that, I don't know, that he stabs this monster in the end with a kryptonite spear and then somehow gets killed at the same time. And you know he's not going to be dead anyway because they have a Justice League movie coming. So it's, I don't know, the whole thing just struck me as very pointless and poorly executed.
So if it doesn't fit a plan of any kind and then doesn't follow through with staying dead without an explanation for how they came back, like it has to fit the universe that it happens in.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely needs to follow the rules of the established universe.
I totally agree. Could not agree more. Now, when are there any times that you feel a character shouldn't be killed off?
Yeah, one of the main love interests in a romance story, you don't want to kill off one of those characters.
Why not?
Because you want a happy ending. I mean, it's a romance. You want to be uplifted, and I mean, stories are, a series of tension, building suspense, and then release. And if in a romance they don't get together at the end, they don't live happily ever after, at least as far as, the end of the story, then you're not really releasing that tension.
So only if they are a primary couple for the story and they're already in a happy relationship should the character be allowed to live.
I mean, if it's a romance, they reaching the point of being in a happy relationship should be kind of the point of the story. That's kind of where you want to build to. And I could see where you that point and kill the character. Do I?
I see the possibility where you could kill one of them off. Like if you have a relationship where the two people are together, it's this lovely, beautiful relationship, and then one of them dies in a car accident, but was an organ donor, and somebody got the heart transplant, and you end up meeting that person and falling in love with the person who has the heart of the original. I mean, like, we could make this work.
You're braver than I am.
I mean, we could make it work, right? Like, you can kill off one of them. Okay, so even something, funnier, practical magic. we had the movie Practical Magic with Nicole Kidman and Sandra Bullock, right? And Nicole Kidman's character falls for this bad guy and he dies. And then they bring him back. And he's super creepy and dark and crazy. And so then they kill him again.
I've never seen it. It doesn't sound like a romance.
Really? This might be fun for you, because then like his spirit possesses one of the sisters. So then they have to do like this old school exorcism kind of thing, like witch style, to get him back out. It's hilarious. Yeah. You should totally check that one out. Because then you get to kill somebody more than once if they come back. So, and you've mentioned that, you can bring characters back. So how often do you allow a character to come back? Have you ever allowed a character to come back?
I don't think I've ever personally brought a character back from the dead.
So, and I know that I kind of mentioned to you after that one main character dies, and I was like, well, bring him back. If there's magic in the universe, bring him back. And you were like, you don't want me to bring him back. So why is that? If you, put in your head that maybe I could bring this character back, why would we not want you to?
Because I don't think the magic in that universe really works that way. I mean, I haven't reached that point in the story yet, but there is, I guess you would call it necromancy, death magic.
Mm-hmm.
But they're just reanimated corpses. They're not alive again. So that's not really what you want.
Definitely go watch Practical Magic. You so need to see it. You're going to be sitting there the whole time going, oh dear God, why am I watching this? It's going to be awesome.
It's really nice to me.
So when you do go to kill a character, or if you're reading a book that has the death of a character in it, what is something that you're looking for in that death scene? What do you think must be included, besides the fact that the character is going to die? What do you think should definitely be included in that scene?
I think the other characters should react appropriately.
Okay.
It should have weight for them. Should be treated with seriousness. I mean, unless you're writing a comedy or satire or something like that. But otherwise, yeah.
Okay, so as long as the other characters kind of react appropriately.
Yeah, they should be grieving, or if the circumstances are right, they should be afraid for themselves. Depending on what's going on.
So how do you make sure that a death has the effect that you're wanting it to? Like, how do you make sure that a character's death is going to be sad? Or how do you make sure that a character's death is going to be joyous for the other characters?
It's funny. I said earlier that I don't draw from personal experience for writing, for killing off characters, but you kind of do. I mean, in a way, because you know how you might have reacted in that situation if you've ever faced it, and you can put those emotions into the other characters.
Mm-hmm. So
you just use logical deduction if you're not.
So if you have a character who, kind of comes and goes throughout the story, they haven't played any major roles, but you're kind of done with them, what is your go-to style of murdering a character?
I would probably have another character in the story do it. That way, that seems like the easiest way to progress the plot and develop the killer's character.
That definitely makes it personal.
Yeah.
So are your killers usually your main characters?
Sometimes, I mean, in the case of Sour House, yes. Um, and then sometimes it's just a fact of the world in which the characters live.
Now, if you're going to go pick a book off of a shelf, is it possible for you to get a book that does not have death in it? Or is it kind of a prerequisite that all the books that you read have some kind of death in it?
It's definitely not a prerequisite.
So you read romance novels?
No, but
since apparently those are the only ones without death. No.
I'm sure there's something on my bookshelf that doesn't have a character die in it.
It's the dictionary. So, I mean, what other aspects do you look for in a story to kind of keep you going through, or are you just waiting for the death of those characters?
Oh no, I'm invested in the story. The death of the characters is incidental. I mean, it's part of the story. It can work. It can be a major part of the story, but you don't want to read a book just waiting for, you know, the annoying sidekick to die. You want to be invested in the character. If the annoying sidekick is taking you out of it, then it's not a good book.
Yeah. So you were willing to be invested in Harry Potter for all those books just for Dumbledore to die?
I mean, it's obvious that it was going to happen at some point, but
why was that obvious?
Because that was the role that he served in the story. He was the mentor. At some point, Harry has to stand on his own without him.
He can't just go on his own. Dumbledore has to die.
That is the trope. I mean, I suppose he didn't have to. You could have, maybe she could have written it without killing Dumbledore, but she would have had to have done a lot of, I don't know, explaining on how to get him out of the way.
So is that kind of something that you pay attention to during a story, is the purpose for each of the characters and what role they seem to play?
Not usually, no. If I think about it after the fact, then I can kind of detect these things, but no, I'm not really paying attention to it as I'm reading.
Now, when you write a death scene, approximately how long are these death scenes? Is it going to be just, a page or two? Is it just, oh, by the way, they died while they were there? Is it something long and drawn out, like somebody, like, I don't know, getting sick or something, and it takes a long time to die? Like, how quick are these scenes usually?
Mine are usually no more than a few paragraphs. I don't really like to linger over it, and I don't want the character to, be lying on the floor, bleeding, giving some heartfelt death scene speech. I always avoid that.
Mm-hmm.
So I just
why avoid it?
It doesn't seem very realistic to me. I mean, usually the characters of my stories are young enough that they don't see it coming. So.
Okay. All right. So do you have you ever had that character that's kind of on their deathbed for a long period of time, and they talk to people, and, they're kind of tying up loose ends? Or is it always just kind of like it's a sudden occurrence?
In my stories, it's a sudden occurrence. I think that it can work. I mean, you're talking about the Optimus Prime death scene, and the original Transformers movie from 1986.
Old school.
You got to pass that matrix of leadership on to somebody else. You need time to do it before you die.
So, I mean, that's the thing is it, so if there is a character who is a mentor, do any of them come out alive at the end?
Gandalf did.
Yeah, but he died anyway. They just brought him back.
Die.
Yeah.
He brought him back, and then he wasn't there at the end to guide Frodo and Sam, but
right.
But he was there to congratulate them after they got the job done.
Yeah, exactly. So is it possible for a mentor to live through a story?
That's the only example I can think of offhand. I'm sure it's happened other times.
So not so much is what you're saying.
Pretty much, yeah.
Now, when you kind of put these into your outlines that a character is going to die, do you go ahead and mark out the method for how they're going to die? Do you how much of this death scene do you plan out beforehand? Or is it just they need to die in this, section and just go ahead and make it happen?
It depends on the character. Usually it's not that detailed. It's more a case of, okay, in this scene, this character needs to get killed by this other character, but the exact method by which it happens, it usually doesn't, I don't plan it out in meticulous detail until I'm actually writing it.
Now, how gory are your death scenes usually?
Depends on the genre. In Sallow House, which is a horror novel, some of them are pretty gory. But it's just words on paper, so it's fine. Don't be squeamish.
Even though everybody's coming up with pictures of it in their head, it's fine.
Well, that's on you.
It's just a story. Now, if there are people who usually write in other genres and they're thinking about dipping their toes into killing off characters, what is some advice that you think you would give them about how to approach this? Because some people are terrified to kill characters.
I would say don't get too attached. They're just fictional characters. It's okay. Make sure that it doesn't clash with the tone of the story that you've established up to that point. I mean, if it's a just a fun adventure, and then all of a sudden one of the characters dies, that can give the reader some whiplash, and you don't really want to do that. So make sure it's consistent with the tone of the story. And yeah, that's pretty much all you need to know. And if it needs to be done, just do it. Tear the Band-Aid off.
Like ripping off a Band-Aid. Just go ahead and kill the character.
Yep.
Are there any characters you have that you would be upset if they did die? Like if you're writing out a series and you end up do you end up getting attached to any of your characters?
Oh sure, yeah. But I mean, if it has to be done, it has to be done. Yeah, it's funny. I was writing the sequel to Sallow House, and I didn't have the ending planned out in as much detail as I would have liked, and I wasn't 100% sure at the end whether the main villain was going to live or die. So when I reached that point, I mean, I guess maybe I shouldn't say, I don't know, but I realized that the story was leading me in one direction, and I had to kind of go in that direction. And it wasn't really a case of something I didn't want to do necessarily. It's just that's what fit, and I was okay with it.
So have you ever gotten emotional about the death of any of your characters?
No.
Has there ever been addition of life in any of your books? Has there ever been like people had kids or, like, so there's new people in your universe, or do you just kill people off?
Yeah, I've had characters have kids before. Well, yeah.
Was it the story you wrote in third grade this time?
No.
By third grade, you were allowing people to have babies.
No,
but by fourth, they're back to just dying.
Ironically enough, this is a story that was set in hell, and one of the characters is pregnant. So it's.
Of course it is. Is that story out? Is that
no,
one?
It isn't. It's unpublished and unfinished.
Oh, that would be a fun one to finish. That sounds like it. So when you were writing the addition of life in that one, did it feel weird?
Only in the sense that it felt like uncharted territory. Because I don't have any kids myself, so I don't know. I'm just winging it, which I suppose is what all new parents have to do.
Even seasoned ones, we all just wing it.
Okay, well, there you go.
You wing it every day.
Yeah,
exactly. So, because that's what I find kind of funny is that a lot of times you get told to write what you know, mm-hmm. right? So, ever killed anybody? I guess I should ask.
I wrote a story with your offspring in it, and I killed her. So.
That's true.
She dared me to do
it. Exactly. And I wrote the fan fiction about people going to a protest because of the character you killed. Mm-hmm. So, I feel you. Both sides of that coin. That's what's kind of funny though, is that are there any situations, do you think that you'll ever write a story where there isn't a major death of a character? Or do you think that it makes dimension to a story? Do you think that it makes it more relatable by having a death? Or is it just to fit the genre and just to fit the purpose?
I think as long as it accurately reflects the human experience, then it's relatable to the reader.
Now, when you have death in these different, because you have different kinds of universes based on the story, they're not all in the same kind of universe. So, and I know that you handle the death, a certain way in a certain book. Do you have different, the after death situations, like funerals and, death marches and, do they burn it? Do you have different methods of how to handle death in different stories? Or do you just kind of, this is the death and then this is what they always do?
I've written funeral scenes before. I think it's just whatever works in the world. Like the sequel to Shallow House starts out with a funeral. Well, after the prologue, it starts out with a funeral. And that's just, based on our own traditions. It's just a regular funeral that anybody might have attended. As far as more fantastical worlds, I've written funeral scenes there as well. And it's just a matter of making up whatever traditions that they have.
Is it difficult to come up with those different ideas of what to do after the death of a character?
Not necessarily, although it might require research, because you can always research different historical practices and traditions, beliefs, and kind of work those into the culture of whatever fictional story you're working on. But I don't think it's hard necessarily. I wouldn't go that far.
All right, cool. So before we kind of finish up, what do you think is the overall need for having death of characters in stories? Why should someone put a death of a character in their story?
Well, it just depends, you know. It gives Agatha Christie a murder to solve, or you know, gives someone to avenge, or it's just, I mean, you know, typically I think you know the kind of story that you're working on if the death of a character serves a purpose and what purpose it serves. You know how it should motivate your main characters.
All right. So before we go, I want to go ahead and remind everybody that we're also doing Monday sprints, writing time at noon. And then we're also going to have a final push starting at 7 p.m. on Tuesday to kind of get the last bit of words in for Nano. Now, when it comes to finishing up Nano, are you kind of planning on anything to do after you finish your Nano project? When you finish killing a character, do you feel happy about it? Are you like, yes, and we're done for the day? Or are you kind of like, all right, who else can we kill? Like, what's the lasting effect there?
I'm usually pretty satisfied after I kill a character, especially if it's fun to write, and it usually is.
It kind of makes you giggle a little.
I won't say that I don't.
All right, good to know. If we ever see you
I'll remember it's just fiction.
But it feels real, and that's what matters. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Phil. I really appreciate you taking some time to let me know more about killing characters. If you have not checked out Phil Malone's books out there, he's got Sallow House, and he's also working on the second book in the Sallow House series. Phil Malone is who you want to look for. He also has comics out, just like he mentioned. He is very inspired and motivated by comic books. So he's also got Vandals out there as well. Very cool comic, amazing artwork as well. So make sure that you check out Phil Malone. He is on Instagram as well as, you know, all sorts of fun places. So look for him at different comic shops, talk to your local comic book stores, see if you can get his stuff in, and definitely order a copy of Sallow House from Amazon. It is available online now. I will see you guys later. Have fun. Thank you so much, Phil, for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And I will see you guys soon. Bye.